For our next session, I am joined by Simon Horswell, fraud specialist and expert document examiner at Onfido. Together today, we are going to discuss what it takes to fight the advanced fraud threats that we are facing in today, which, broadly here at FindBiometrics, we're really calling the era of identity. Really excited to have you here, Simon. This is an important topic. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So let's start off by setting the stage. Fraud, as you know, many people here know, it's hitting historic highs. It's just constantly ascending. In Canada, where I'm based, for example, fraud losses were up about 40% year over year in 2022. Meanwhile, in the United States, the ITRC, the Identity Theft Resource Center, was reporting a 1,000% year over year increase in business social media takeovers. 87% of those led to revenue losses. What's happening, and why is modern cybercrime so focused on fraud?
Yeah, this is the thing. It's since we've all gone digital, I think it's fair to say that we've just seen all of these things increase. It's moved away from. It's not to say that traditional physical scams don't exist anymore, but certainly fraudsters have found a new rich market, and it makes it a lot more interesting from their point of view, where you've got all of these untapped resources. It's uncharted territory. It's basically a nice fresh field to go and plow their misdeeds in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It really does seem as though the digital transformation that we saw during the pandemic is playing a huge role here as well. It really expanded the attack surface. How have recent trends toward remote and hybrid work really guided the evolution of fraud?
Yeah, well, as you say, the pandemic has been, certainly to my mind, I think a lot of people, a lot of observers' minds, it's been a game changer in terms of how this landscape has shaped out. Prior to that, I think we were seeing much lower figures in terms of, or certainly much less sophistication in the attempts that we were seeing. You were getting some fraud rings, but I think when the pandemic happened and everyone was forced into this remote environment, it forced a load of companies to move into this area, and with it, the fraudsters were also forced as well. You have to remember the fraud will always follow where the money is. And when you start bringing all of these services online and you make it so that account sign up is done remotely, it presents a whole new load of opportunities for these people. And that's essentially what's kicked these things off. It's really taken off. We're seeing fraudsters becoming more innovative. They've taken to this idea of how you can do this en masse. And that's the kind of changes that we're seeing. That's why the scale has just really kind of grown so much.
Absolutely, yeah. As soon as it becomes scalable, that's a really frightening thing.
Yeah, it's always about return of investment. I think some people may still look at criminals and fraudsters as just thugs or what have you, but the fact of the matter is that isn't what this is about. This is obviously very big business. Many of these fraud rings, these organized groups, they're running it very much like a proper company would. You have a chief technical officer, you have a chief operations officer. These roles might not be given an official sort of title or salary, but you have people that are working in these roles. And the more efficient and effective you are, the better your return of investment. And that's ultimately what it's all about.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not some fairy tale where there's just some bad guys out there committing chaos.
No striped tops, no little black masks anymore, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Yeah, not just us with angry eyebrows and things like that. But fraud is a really broad term. You mentioned some forms there. I mentioned some different ideas of fraud at the top of this, but let's get specific here. What are some of the current fraud threats that are having the most impact?
Well, we're still seeing people using homemade physical counterfeits. So previously, as I say, before pandemic, you would see a lot more physical counterfeits that have been manufactured at fraud factories, and there's still an element of that that's going to be used for human trafficking or border crossing or terrorist activities where people need to cross borders. But you don't now need to present that to a border officer to elicit the highest amount of money. So the standard can drop right down. Instead of having to have like a huge factory that's producing very, very convincing physical counterfeits that can undergo rigorous tests by law enforcement agents, You now just need to have something that can fool an online verification process. So a number of the security features that you'd see have been taken away, which means that the bar of entry now is as low as a laptop and potentially a desktop printer. So we're still seeing the physical counterfeits, the homemade physical counterfeits. They still are a big quantity of what we see. But certainly over the last year, the number of digital manipulated documents that we've seen has really spiked. It's just so much easier if you're going to manipulate it and then print it out, depending on the process that you're having to go through, will dictate whether you need to physically reproduce that or whether you can simply upload an image or inject an image that's been digitally manipulated. So that's one aspect of it. On the other hand, we will see deepfakes as well. Those have really started to come into force this year. I think I've been predicting it for the last couple of years, not to sort of go on about it, but we all knew it was going to come. And then this year it really has hit. We're definitely seeing that now, not just deepfakes, but as the technology's moved on, we're seeing the cheap fakes as well. So if you're just using still photograph, then the chances are that's much easier to manipulate than a live video feed. But you get all of these filters now and all of these other things that are making it much more easy for the fraudster to initiate some form of deepfake. On top of that, I think one of the more difficult to spot problems that we've seen lately, certainly this is an ongoing battle for not just ourselves, but of many of our clients, particularly those in the financial services. Scams have always kind of been a way to get information, to sort of somehow acquire services or illicit money. And what we're seeing now is scams that are being used to get people who are genuine, with genuine documents, with the accurate biometrics, to sign up on the fraudster's behalf. Right. So that becomes a much bigger challenge. What we're having to rely on now, if we've got an authentic document and we've got what appears to be the right person presenting that document, using the correct process, now we have to rely on some of those additional behind the scenes features that we maybe don't make as much of a big deal about, but they're equally as vital in this kind of scenario. They tend to be one of the few things we have left.
Absolutely. And I'm going to want to dig into that a little bit later. But first, the big theme of today is strong identity around the world. I'm wondering, this is obviously, just as everybody has an identity, everybody is at threat of having that identity stolen or being impersonated, right? How does fraud vary from region to region? And are there any regions that are having different impacts than others?
One of the things we notice is Onfido is that we are a global company. So we have clients in every single region. And I wouldn't say that any one region is getting hit harder or that any one region is perpetrating more fraud when it comes to this identity verification crime. You can see gangs that will be of different nationalities setting up in different countries all around the world. Sometimes you can trace it back using IP address or geolocator, but it really does vary. You can see groups springing up in Central Europe, in Western Europe, also in Eastern Europe, but also across Asia. It really does vary. And I think one of the things that we kind of commented on before is about how fraud used to be kind of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Then when the pandemic hit, we started to see it become 24/7. And with that, that comes from the fact that it is now truly global. So any client, any company in any country can be attacked by someone somewhere else in the world. So it becomes a 24-hour shop.
Yeah, it's pretty frightening. I mean, yeah, it's really wild. I mean, it's not a big surprise that that everything of the past few years changed in that specific way, but it is alarming when you think about it from that other side of the equation too. I mean, kind of going off of that, while fraud's been booming and while everything like digital transformation has been happening, we've also seen the rise of biometric onboarding over the past few years. Why is it important to have biometrics specifically included in the fight against fraud, especially at that front door step?
Yeah. Well, part of the whole process is verifying who you're dealing with. Right? So it's a KYC process or it's KYB process, but you're trying to get to know who it is you're actually dealing with. One of the best ways to do that is have them present a government issued document. So you've got quite a high standard that you can rely on the identity of the document. And then you've got to match that and tie that to a person. because if I don't introduce biometrics, then it's really straightforward for someone to simply download a document or obtain an image of a document or obtain the actual document through theft, for example, and then present it. Because if you're never linking it to a physical person, then it has no real meaning, no real significance. You haven't verified anything except someone is in possession of an identity document. So biometrics plays a really key point in doing that. And I think one of the things that we've seen, as I say, deepfakes is a bit of an issue. But that aside, we've seen through our own statistics, we do a report every year, an annual fraud report, where we look through our own statistics, and year on year, the same thing's borne out. Clients that are just requesting document verification and aren't tying it to biometrics, they tend to experience 5 times the amount of fraud as the next client who has attached a static photograph to it. That then goes down again if the client has decided that they want to have a live capture, so like a video capture. So it's all increments. It becomes kind of like a threshold that you have to cross. It raises the bar. It's not impossible to attack. It's not that no one attacks it, but it certainly does act as quite a good deterrent for the most cases.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Once again, comparing I'm always thinking of it as 2 sides because it's an arms race. But we're always talking about the user experience, reducing friction. They want to have as low friction and experience as well when they're trying to commit this fraud.
Well, this is the constant argument if you're a fraud specialist or you're there to prevent fraud, is you're constantly battling with this argument of it needs to be speed, it needs to be less friction. I would say that generally speaking, your genuine customers actually probably prefer a little bit of friction so they have some reassurance. There has to be something to indicate that you've done due diligence. I think there was even a study that proved that people felt more secure about a check or some kind of validation if there was like a little circle to tell them it was working, as opposed to it being instant. People were actually having to slow things down to put across that level of assurity. So I think as long as your user experience is actually worthwhile and you can take people through it as quickly as possible, then the necessary friction that you need to verify someone's identity, to authenticate they are who they say they are, is completely necessary. And the amount of drop-off you get for it, we do studies on drop-off as well. Who's to say that percentage that do drop off were genuine in the first place? When presented with the first hurdle, they've then left. That's kind of what it's there to do. And if you're a genuine person, none of these things are really challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're there because you want something. As long as it's not too difficult, you're not going to abandon it. I think it's fascinating to think about how that user experience really is a relationship between a client and their customer. I'm wondering how do biometrics and identity sort of build trust on both sides of that equation between a bank and their customer or something?
Well, as I say, I think the fact that you're getting that person to verify who they are, if you're the bank, for example, you now have quite a firm basis that you can work with. You've identified them, you've tied that identity to an actual person by using the biometric identification. So you have a level of assurity there. That also then gives you the opportunity for re-authentication further down the line, because people do leave their passports at home or might not have their driving license with them at that particular moment, but they'll still have their face. Let's be honest. From the end user's point of view, as I say, that level of reassurance that someone is actually doing something, that there is some kind of gatekeeper as you're joining this particular organization, so your account does have some kind of security, some kind of threshold. I think that reassurance is what starts to build up trust. You've seen documentaries on Netflix like The Tinder Swindler, and then there was a big outcry after that where suddenly everyone was saying, well, why can't we have some form of registration? You see similar things happening with Twitter where it's like, yeah, you need to verify who you are. It's you can't just do these things anonymously because there are swindlers out there. There are people that are doing other things. So I think the fact that there is some level of check, and then it does require biometrics and someone to actually put their face to a name, does actually kind of start to elicit that kind of trust.
Yeah, it sort of builds a good faith interaction from the very beginning. Word of the day at this point is going to be boom, because of the big IDV boom that we saw around 2020. But because of this, we're seeing so many different solutions out there that offer biometric onboarding. I'm I'm wondering, what are the specific qualities of a biometric solution that are best suited to fight against the modern fraud threats that we're seeing right now?
I think it has to be a layered approach. You can't be complacent about it and think that just because I've got the best in class of this one particular aspect of the identity check, that I've got it all covered. There needs to be a layered approach, and if it's like with documents. It was always, that's a really nice security feature, but it's rubbish if it's not kind of integrated with the other security features. So you want to have a layered approach that's all integrated together so that you can verify the signals. So if I'm capturing an image of a document, yes, I want to verify that document is genuine, but I also want to be able to verify the source of that document as being genuine. I want to check that the transaction has been straightforward and genuine. There aren't any gray areas or shadows over that particular transaction. I also want to do the same thing when it comes to the biometrics. I want to make sure that I'm getting a genuine first-hand copy. So if there's maybe some kind of direct channel between the capturing device and the authentication organization, that is a big deal. And then you can analyze that traffic and make sure that every part of it is actually bona fide, as opposed to something that runs up a red or an amber flag. So it needs to be layered. It needs to be a considered layered approach, and it needs to be well integrated together so you're getting the full picture. That's how you can start to really understand what's happening.
And kind of going off of that, you mentioned that there are support technologies that help with a solution like this. We don't talk about them as much because they're not as maybe like flashy. They don't scan our face like.
Or they're quite useful not to mention.
But
yeah, no, it's I think
anything that you can mention, like what's there.
Yeah, certainly. I think some of them are kind of probably, a lot of people may be aware of them. So one of the more simple ones is IP address. You can use that to tie groups together, or you can use it to check if something's been used before. One of the features I think we like to use is it's just generally repeat attributes. So we have something called repeat attempts, where we're looking for data that's been recycled. So if it's got the same name, if it's cropped up, how many times, and then you can use that to start to pick out synthetic identities as well. Metadata as well, if you're looking for repeated attributes in terms of the same face being used all the time, because the fraudster may only have one face. But then also you can apply that to the other signals that we're talking about. So things like IP address, you can start to pick out things like the same email address or an artificially generated email address popping up. These are all the kind of aspects that you can leverage to try and verify the extra things about that particular transaction.
Yeah, it's always good to see, I think, the full footprint of something like this, and understand that identity is a little bit more holistic than the ones and zeros, like off and on, that people normally expect from, like, I don't know, the cryptography side of things.
Yeah, but it's so important to get the whole picture. As I say, that layered approach is the only way really now in a remote environment that you can have the same kind of trust that people still instill in someone turning up in person and handing a document to you. The fact of the matter is more documents are checked online now, and has been for quite a while. Even pre-pandemic, there are more documents verified online than were at any, all of the border crossings put together. So it does have a big impact. And the fact is, you can bring more knowledge to bear in an online environment where you can scale things up than you can with an in-person transaction.
Absolutely, yeah. You mentioned that fraud is now 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's happening right now. And so I want to, throw the audience a bone here. What can they do right now to mitigate fraud?
As I say, don't be complacent. Make sure that you're doing everything you can in terms of your verification process. If you're just checking documents, then make sure that you're now introducing some form of biometrics, even if it's just a still image. Fine, but make sure that it's captured through the same device. Make sure you have a secure transaction process, so it's not via a portal, it's via a developed SDK that takes control of the capturing device, so you have some level of assurity. Better yet, have a video, because it's not impossible, but it certainly raises the bar, and there are other signals you can look for if someone's faking a video, but raising the bar by forcing someone to create that video content. Not everyone has access to it at the moment, so that's where it raises the bar. And even when we do see it, at the moment, there are still quite a few signals that we can leverage to try and pick these things out. So those would be my first tips.
For sure, yeah. And then, obviously, when it comes to implementing strong identity platforms and strong identity solutions for this, people are going to encounter some challenges when they do that. I'm wondering, what are some of the most common challenges people face when they're trying to implement strong identity, and what would you say they should do to overcome those?
Contact Onfido.
No,
but in all seriousness, it's there is so much compliance involved as well within different regions, and you have to be aware of, particularly if you're in one region then going to expand into another region, you have to be aware of what the compliance needs are in that region. So it's very important that you're keeping all of that in mind. But yeah, as I say, a strong connection that gives you that unique transaction, that unique secure process, that means you can cut down a lot. As much information as you can glean without being too intrusive is what's going to help you strengthen that verification process. But yeah, I mean, it's something, we're quite passionate about it at Onfido. We seek these things out, so we're compliant in as many regions as we can be, and we're always looking to expand further. So yeah, I said it glibly, but I think in all seriousness, your best bet is to contact someone who knows what they're talking about, so that they can give you advice and walk you through it. And that's exactly what we'd be doing at Onfido.
Well, I mean, I promise I didn't plan this as the ultimate segue, but we're just about out of time here. Simon, if people want to contact you or some of your colleagues at Onfido, what's the best way that they could do that?
The best way to do that is if you contact us at onfido.com. That's onfido.com. You can also reach us if you check out our annual fraud report. I think we publish, so you can sort of find us through that. You'll find a load of content on our website that can help and advise on this kind of stuff, or just generally reach out through the chat process.
Fantastic. Well, we'll also share some of those links in the chat right now, and be sure to check out Onfido's booth in the expo hall. Everyone, Simon, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hope to have you back again.